Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Emily Fafaro with NASA's Office of Communications, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about tomorrow's launch. At 8:03 a.m. Eastern Time, NASA will launch its next communications satellite, named the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite M, or as we like to call it, TDRS-M. This will be the 13th TDRS satellite that NASA has built, and it will join the fleet in space that helps us do global communications with more than 40 of our missions. From those beautiful images from the Hubble Space Telescope to communicating with astronauts on the International Space Station, this fleet of satellites helps us further our understanding of the world and universe around us. With the launch of TDRS-M tomorrow, this fleet of our space network will be furthered for another 15 years or more, which is really exciting. I'm joined here by Amber Jacobson, who's going to help introduce some of the really great speakers we have to talk to you today. We're going to be taking questions throughout the broadcast from our audience in the room, as well as our audience online. If you have questions and you're online, you can ask them by using hashtag AskNASA. Amber, take it away.
Thanks, Emily. It's not often that we get to talk about communications. We launch a lot of different missions. We launch science missions. We launch human spaceflight missions. But today, we get to talk about communications, which is that backbone, that lifeline that makes all of those missions work. We've got a really exciting panel of speakers for you guys to talk to today. We're going to talk about not only how we build the satellites, how we launch them, but we're also going to talk to you about the big picture too. Where are we going in space communications? How we operate. We're going to talk to you about how this mission is going to support our future human spaceflight missions. And we're actually going to hear from some special guests too about just how important this network is to them. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up our first speaker, Mr. Badre Yunus. Badre is the Deputy Associate Administrator for Space Communications and Navigation, and he is in charge of all three of our NASA networks, the Space Network, the Near Earth Network, and the Deep Space Network, as well as how all the technology development that we're doing to further develop those networks. Hi, Badre.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you. By the way, between both of you, we gave away my presentation. So but this is good. This is good. SCAN is the Space Communication Navigation Program. Our office is at headquarters. We are responsible for anything that pertains to space communication navigation. Without SCAN, all we have is very expensive junk in space. So communication is critical to relay the information, be that scientific or exploratory, from our astronaut up on the space station or en route somewhere. So SCAN is vital to NASA's ability to meet its mission objective. As NASA and the mission keep on evolving, SCAN need to keep on evolving. I talked Amber talked about three networks. We have the Deep Space Network, we have the Near Earth Network, and we also have the Space Network. The Deep Space Network essentially involves mission going to deep space, planetary mission, and missions that have gone beyond the solar system, such as Voyager. You are talking mission sending signals, very weak signal, less than 100 watt, from billions of miles away. That's not, your neighbor, how to say it, close proximity. That's pretty far. It takes a lot of technology and know-how to get the data back to Earth. And that's what we do, world-class services. Actually, the system that we have is unique and is not available with other government agencies or other space agencies or commercial entities. The next network, we have the Near Earth Network, evolved over time, supporting anything from Earth all the way to the moon and a little bit beyond. We are talking about scientific missions that they do not need the real-time support. They can collect data from remote sensors and dump it at a certain point in Earth. And we also have the Space Network. Space Network has two components. The ground infrastructure with big antennas communicating with the space component, a fleet of tracking and data relay satellites, of which TDRS-M will be the new addition to this family. That's our baby. Tomorrow it's going to be launched. It's like giving birth. Really, we are expecting a newborn tomorrow to join the fleet, the family of satellites up there. It's critical for us for this mission to be successful. We have a superb team between the launch services in here and ULA, to the Boeing team, as well as our TDRS project office at the Goddard Space Flight Center. They all work very hard, thousands of hours, to prep the baby such that tomorrow it will be a perfect birth. So this, I have some charts. Can we show some of them? Please, the next chart. This is what we have. We have 3 generations of TDRSs. TDRS started as a concept in the mid-70s. Prior to that, NASA relied on globally distributed ground stations to connect with mission, primarily the human spaceflight mission, the Apollo time frame. And we had about 20-plus ground stations, sometime in a very dangerous part of the world. Now we cannot access it, but we needed the location to provide that coverage. We also have boats and airplanes deployed to connect with these missions. With all of this, we could only get 18% coverage. Just imagine that. 82% of the time, the spacecraft was invisible to us. We could not communicate with them. So we thought about a concept where instead of the mission sending the data directly to Earth, we can put 2 nodes up in space. And from the very far away, you can practically see half of the globe. So in theory, 2 of these nodes will allow you to see much of the globe, anything flying below geosynchronous orbit. That's how TDRS came about. And we launched the first one in 83. Then in 86, we launched the second one, but that was not a success because we were launching these satellites on board the shuttle, the space shuttle. And you all remember the Challenger incident, and we lost that spacecraft back then. It was a tragedy, but we kept on working and we recovered. We deployed about 5 additional satellites of that generation. And the usage of these satellites has been so awesome, so critical for NASA. And as we become more independent on these satellites, on these tracking and data relay satellites, we needed to build more. So we had the second generation. Second generation, developed in the 1990 technology, but launched and deployed in the early 2000s. Our requirements have kept on going up, and they are going to keep on going up for the foreseeable future. So that's why, we are, banking on a successful launch of TDRS-M because it's going to play that critical role, providing the capacity needed to meet in all of these requirements. NASA needs about 6 of these spacecraft operationally, to be operational, in 3 different nodes, providing support to all kind of users flying below. And we also need 1 extra one as a spare, hot spare, just in case one goes down, you have something to replace it with. So, you can tell from the first fleet, much of the first fleet has outlived its life expectancy. Some of them have been retired. Some are limping, They don't have full capability. Just they have some limited capability. So what NASA does, it takes advantage of the limited capability on one and, combine it with limited capability on others such that the ensemble can give you an equivalent spacecraft. So that's what we are doing now. And by the year 2020, we are going to lose more. So that's why TDRS-M is so critical. We need 6 spacecraft to meet the operational needs. And that spare, sometime we may be able to live without it, but we are willing to, to take that risk. And we are now focusing on what's going to come after TDRS, after this generation of TDRSs. The technology, as I said, evolved the capability evolved, using the 1980 technology. But the technology has evolved since then. Look what's happening in the telecommunication world. Look what's happening everywhere else. That exponential growth in capability. And that's what we are trying to leverage. Next chart. So NASA, for the past so many years, have been focusing on transformational technology. We are all government agencies are now working with limited budget. So you need to invest in a technology that will give you good return on investment. You could not afford to invest in something that may double your money. No. We wanted something to give you 1 or 2 order magnitude better performance and better value. So we have focused on optical communication, in particular laser. And because the future mission will be going from the surface of Earth all the way to deep space, we wanted something that you can use across all stages of that mission. We didn't want to have something for near Earth, something for deep space, something for the in-between. We wanted the same system to be operational across all phases of the mission. So in addition to that, as we commercialize space, space is going to be congested, as well as the ground, infrastructure is getting congested. We wanted to build enough capacity up there. And we need to allow the user maximum flexibility. Because when you use laser communication, a cloud or two may block you. You'll be denied that channel. So we wanted something that's smart enough to figure out when there are clouds, to figure the best option for that spacecraft, whether to send directly, to its ground station at their mission control center, or to send it to another ground station, or to go through a data relay satellite, or to decide, to use the RF, the radio frequency option with limited data rate. So we are building a cognitive technology, radios that can think, radios that can adapt, radios that can communicate across all of the network about the state of health of every element and every segment of the network. In addition to that, this will not be good without good communication protocol. TCP/IP has its own limitation. You have to have the ACK and NAC and get congested and break down. So we are going after something more robust, something we call disruption-tolerant networking or delay-tolerant networking, that will allow you, to really ensure that the data get from one point to the other. With the cognitive technology, will allow it to do so in the most efficient way. And again, the laser communication gives you more bandwidth. You are operating in a wavelength that, with so much bandwidth available to you. And also because the beam is so narrow, so thin, it'll provide you some level of security. Because now the footprint is so small, you don't have that many people that can eavesdrop or spoof the information. So there is a lot of advantages with optical comm. And we are going this way. We have decided that this decade, the coming decade, will be the decade of light. And you can quote me on that. That's our, that's what we are calling it, the decade of light, where we intend to light up the communication highways. And we don't want to operate alone. We are working the technology and we are working the standards. We are working with other government agencies as well as other commercial to ensure that we are all compatible and we can provide seamless, interoperable sets of capabilities. If you have any question on that, I will answer it later on. But for now, I need to move forward. The next chart. This is our website. Please visit it, and you'll learn a lot more about what I'm talking about, from optical to quantum technology that we are working on. Next. And I will not leave this place without thanking all of those who made it happen. It's really rocket science, guys. It's not just something you do it in the back, in your garage. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
And I'm open for questions.
Yeah, we have time to take some questions from the room. And remember, if you're watching online, you can use the hashtag AskNASA. So do we have any questions in the room? Yes, right over here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Marie from Roland Park K8 Magnet in Tampa.
Yeah.
My question is about your hot spare and the redundancy. Is it only serving in a redundancy capacity, or is it doing background computations or communications?
It depends on the mission load. Sometimes if you have a hot spare and you have a congested environment, but you need more resources, you can definitely use it. The idea is to do the smart thing. You divvy up your requirement and you support them with a set of capabilities, and you don't exercise the other one. Keep it like fresh, ready on standby until you need it. If you are using all of your assets at the same time, they will age quickly and you won't have that ability to be there when needed. Okay.
Do we have other questions?
John.
We'll wait for the mic to get to you.
Oh, thanks. Hey, I'm John, and I run a YouTube channel about ham radio space communications.
Yep.
So I communicate through LEO satellites and try to talk to astronauts sometimes.
Yeah.
We use frequencies like VHF and UHF, sometimes 1.2 gigahertz and stuff. I'm curious what sort of bands and frequencies and modes that you use for TDRS.
Okay, the tracker and data relay satellite has presently had three different bands. We do the S band, the KU band, and the KA band. And that's the kind of difference that exists between the first generation and the second and the third. The first generation only had S band and KU. We added the KA to the second generation, but we also made some modification to the multiple access scheme allowing onboard beamforming. And then this didn't give us much flexibility, so when we moved to the third generation, we copied the model that we had with the first generation for the multiple access, but we still added the KA band. So in the future, we are going after, continue with the KA band and possibly higher frequency band, but we are going to add the optical range to it. Okay.
Okay, right over here. In the second row.
Oh. So as you expand into light and laser communication, to understand that'll just be for the communication from Earth to maybe one or several satellites, and then the rest of the satellites will communicate amongst each other with the KA band?
It's going to be a collaborative effort between optical and RF. Definitely the optical will replace everything, especially when you are talking space to space. As you go to ground, because of cloud coverage and blockages, now that optical link may be denied to you. So we are going to put the smart into the communication nodes to figure out a way to get this data back to you in the most efficient way and to find a clear path to transmit that data. Again, we are talking about a generation of missions and data relay satellite supporting hundreds of gigabit per second. This is not a trivial thing. The RF may be able to support hundreds of megabits per second. With the existing TDRS, we do up to 600 now, and we are going to 1.2 gigabit per second in the near future. That's why it's a unique system. No other system around can provide this high data rate to the customers. And the advantage also of optical communication beyond the bandwidth and the channel is it's not a regulated spectrum. What has really denied us access to commercial, not allowing us to bridge that gap, were the regulatory environment. I have to operate in government spectrum. They have to operate in non-government spectrum commercial. Near Earth has different spectrum than deep space because deep space is very, starved environment, and any small noise can perturb that, the acquisition of a signal or the transmission of a signal. That's why you need to protect it more. So with optical communication, it's not regulated. Only have some regulation with the FAA about shining laser light into the eyes of pilots, but we have overcome that by going after a wavelength that's harmless to the human eye. The 1550 nanometer is our standard, and we'll be using for all of our communication needs, and will not be harmful. Will satisfy the FAA's concerned. So, did I answer your question? Oh.
I think
so. The future is there. I'm telling you, it's a decade of light, and we intend to do it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm done?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Badri. So the next speaker we have for you today is the project manager of our tracking and data relay satellite, Mr. Dave Littman. Dave is in charge of the build of these satellites, the integration, and the test of them. So Dave, are we ready for launch?
Let's see. I guess if the answer was anything other than yes, we probably wouldn't be here. So I would say yes, we're ready.
Sweet. I'm so excited.
Yeah, we will be on stations tonight. Around 10 o'clock, the spacecraft will come in and get on console. The launch vehicle folks will come in a few hours later, and we'll go through the count and hopefully launch out 8:03 a.m.
Mm-hmm. All righty.
Okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Dave Littman, project manager for TDRS M from Goddard Space Flight Center. I've been with this project since the beginning of TDRS KLM. Contract was awarded in late 2007. It was like December 29th, December 30th, something like that. People were working over the holidays, actually, to kind of commit make the agency's commitment to build these satellites for the agency and to replenish the fleet. And it's been a great ride ever since. As Badri mentioned, the first 7 were put off of the shuttle. We then went to the Atlas 2A with a contract to Boeing. The very first 7 were manufactured by, I always say Northrop Grumman, but that isn't correct, right? It was TRW. TRW at the time were the developers of the original first 7 of TDRS. And then from there, the company's now transitioned over to Northrop Grumman. That's why I think of them that way. But the second generation was, that contract was won by the Boeing company. It started out as Hughes at the time. There's all these transitions that happen in our industry. You're probably part of them. You see it all the time. It's happening, right? It was Hughes at the time when the contract was awarded. Then Hughes became Boeing. It was, bought by Boeing, and some parts of Hughes were divested. So it became the Boeing company, and we launched H, I, and J between the year 2000 and 2002. And after that, we had a short period, and then it was determined that the continuous users of the community needed additional satellites or additional we needed to continue to replenish the fleet to cover the age. As Badri mentioned, some of these satellites have well outlived their lifetime, which is 15 years is what we spec on paper for them to last, but many of them have lasted much longer than that. So we launched TDRS K in 2013, January. We launched L, January 2014. Which, that was kind of nice because we were down here, in December and January. When I live in Maryland, so it's nice weather down here, over the holidays. But for somehow we kind of, picked August. We decided we wanted to hit lightning and thunderstorms, and there was even, I guess, a funnel cloud. Last night is what I heard. There was a funnel cloud in the area. So we're down here, kind of in a different environment, but we're getting ready for another great launch. We've had great success. So I think we maybe have a little bit of video to talk about to show a little bit in the factory where these are developed, which is in the Boeing facility out in El Segundo, California. It's right next to LAX. You can almost throw a stone and hit LAX, pretty much. So this is the satellite. Here it's on the rollover cart. It's just being moved in their high bay. Here you can see some solar wing deployments. So I'm not going to cover any specific topic. It's just to kind of look at some of the processing that happens there in the factory at Boeing. It's a very complicated factory. There are many satellites. At the time in 2012, 2013, when this happened, or when we started, there was so much activity in the Boeing high bay. There were satellites upon satellites that were in the various stages of processing. Everyone has to kind of compete for the resources in that high bay. If you want to go in the thermal vac chamber, there's only 1 or 2 chambers that they have, so your satellites better be on a path to get in there and get out, because there's lots of people lots of missions vying for the same resources to get through environmental testing. So those are just some pictures there of our satellite in its furled antenna configuration being processed at Boeing. So I think we have maybe another little clip to talk about what happens once we launch and separate from the launch vehicle. We can cue that one up. Here we are. We're up. We're just about getting ready to be released, and there goes our satellite there. First thing we do is we unfurl these reflectors because they have to unfurl for a period of time. I'll talk about that in a second. Then we have to raise our orbit because we're in a geosynchronous transfer orbit, so we have 5 apogee burns. Once we get our geosynchronous orbit, we start our deployments. First the solar array, the north wing. Then we deploy our large single-axis antennas. Then out comes the south wing. Then that's the Omni boom that you see there, and that's our space-to-ground link antenna, which gives us the communication to and from the ground. That's like a, 20-second kind of view of what something that takes about 3 weeks to complete from separation. Once we separate, it takes about 10 days to raise our orbit to geosynchronous orbit, and then it takes us about another 4 or 5 days from there to go through our deployments. So it's between 2 and 3 weeks of the whole time before we are in a fully configured state, and then from there we hand over the operations to the White Sands Complex facility where they're operated from, but we don't initially operate them. The initial part of the activity from the burns to get us to the orbit and deployments is taken by the Boeing Mission Control Center out in California. Once we're deployed, we hand over the operations to White Sands Complex area. It's still the Boeing team, but they are now operating the spacecraft from White Sands Complex, and that is where they do the testing of our satellite, making sure that the RF performance to meet our mission requirements and to serve its users is what we wanted it to be, and that it meets our requirements such that the government can then take acceptance of that satellite, and then we turn it over to our sister organization, the Space Network, to operate it. So our project develops them, builds them, launches them, checks them out, and makes sure that they are ready to support the mission, and then we hand them over to our sister organization to be operated. And so the entire constellation is operated today by the Space Network.
Great. Wow, what a cool-looking spacecraft it is. We have time for a couple questions in the room. Do we have any? And also, remember, if you're watching online, you can still join the conversation by using the hashtag AskNASA. So we have a question over here.
Hi, Dave. My name's Chris. My question is, this launch was rescheduled a couple times because of an antenna issue. Could you talk about what happened when the antenna was broke and how long it took to fix and kind of go over that with us?
I can go over first order items, sure. So we bring the spacecraft down here. We ship the flight-ready spacecraft to be processed here at Astrotech. We bring it in and we take it to our Astrotech facility. And once we move it from the trailer that it comes in on, it comes in off of a C-17 from LAX over here, and we landed at Tycho. And then we moved it on a land-all trailer over into our processing cell. We take the cover off, and then we put the spacecraft up. We pick it off not pick it off, but we lift it off of the out of the fixture, out of the transport container, and we put it on the fuel stand. And that is where we process it. All the processing was nominal. It was just as we expected, and then we fueled it. We spent about 5 days or so putting the fuel on the spacecraft. So we were fueled, and we were ready to kind of move to the next step, which is to pick the spacecraft up off of the fuel stand and then move it over onto our payload adapter. The payload adapter is what we use to move over to kind of and then eventually mate to the launch vehicle. So we were in the process of starting that activity to pull the spacecraft off of the fuel stand when there was contact in the process of moving the lifting fixture and the lifting sling over the spacecraft. There's an omni antenna that pokes through a couple of feet higher than those curved antennas, and it's the highest point on the spacecraft. And as the sling was being lowered, it contacted the omni antenna, which is the omni that's up there. And it damaged it. It damaged the top of that antenna. It was visibly damaged, and so we had to kind of we had to assess the situation and address it. Right, so it was not ready for flight at that point. And so what we were able to do, and Boeing was able to do, there were a couple of key items that kind of were critical to the path that we identified forward. One was, is there another antenna that it could be readily available quickly? And it turns out that on another program, there was a very similar, almost equivalent antenna, same part number, different serial number. We evaluated the specs for that antenna, all the testing that had been done on that antenna, and determined that antenna was capable to support our mission. Then the challenge was, how can we replace it? Because we are out over the top of a fueled spacecraft. So we're kind of not in a spot where you really want to conduct a lot of operations. It's not, we were out of, we're kind of way out there. I made a couple comments to our folks. How many sigma are we out here on the curve, right? Are we 3 sigma, 5 sigma? Are we beyond 5 sigma? I don't know. But we were kind of in a spot. I don't know of any other missions that were in that spot. And I've talked it here at our reviews. Every mission's launch campaign is different. So this is, what is life like? A box of chocolate, said, Forrest Gump. So this is the chocolate that we pulled out of the box, right? This is TDRS M's, right? So we have to take care of it. So the biggest concern, the biggest item here was now how do we get access to that antenna? Because we have a fueled spacecraft, we don't want to defuel it, we don't want to move it. So we had to find a fixture that was able to get us up to 30, 35 feet into the air, and then get us access such that technicians could, on their stomachs, on their sides, be able to remove the antenna that was there and replace it. All at the same time, because now we have these, our furled antennas are here and it's poking out through here. The biggest concern there was, well, what if something's dropped? It's going to drop right down into the center of the spacecraft. So we had to basically develop what we call FOD barriers, which are things that kind of prevent things from dropping in, or if something is dropped, that it's caught by the barrier that you put together. So we had 3 or 4 different types of FOD barriers that we put together, and then we used 3D printed parts, and we mocked up the same configuration that we were in. And we put it up at 30 feet, exactly where that antenna was, and then we had the technicians practice using these 3D printed parts to kind of make sure that they would be able to kind of conduct the operation. And they did that over a period of 4 or 5 days. They can basically develop the planning steps, and then they iterated them. Then they basically improved the planning and did it again. You know, they did it until they were comfortable that we could do it safely and that we felt that we would not introduce any other risk to the spacecraft. So when we were comfortable, that is exactly what was accomplished. We went up there. On one day, we removed the antenna. The next day, we reinstalled the new antenna. And the following day, we conducted a test, which is to make sure that once we reinstalled the test, that Omni antenna would be functional and ready to support our mission. The testing was successful, and we once again had a flight-ready spacecraft. I don't know, maybe I gave you the long version.
Thank you.
But I don't know if that helps, but effectively that is what took a little bit longer and why we needed to be delayed a couple weeks.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions right now, but we will do questions again later in the show. So thank you so much, Dave.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So our next speaker today is Mr. Neil Malik. Neil is the Deputy Network Director for Human Spaceflight, and he's in charge of not only coordinating the communication services for space station and our commercial cargo vehicles, but also he's working on planning communication services for our future human spaceflight vehicles, like Orion, like the Space Launch System, and our commercial crew vehicles. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Amber, for the introduction. It's a pleasure being here. And for the folks here in the room, thank you very much for joining us. It is a great sunny day, and it's exciting to be here with all of you. What will be more exciting is at 8:03 tomorrow morning, so keep your fingers crossed for that. We are all waiting for that specific moment when we launch TDRS-M. So as you can see behind us, that's TDRS-M. And what I want to do is really kind of lighten things for everyone. So let's talk about what this really means for us. So the focus really is TDRS-M. It enables communications for all the NASA missions that we have, both human spaceflight and non-human spaceflight. And so, you've already heard International Space Station. You've heard Hubble. And what I want to do is be able to go and tell you why we even did TDRS in the first place and what it's helping us do now and what it's going to do for us in the future. Because at the end of the day, that's what this really is. It's a great-looking spacecraft, but again, it looks just like another geosynchronous spacecraft. And so what I want to do is talk about space-based relays. You'll hear that a lot. If you go to the NASA Goddard webpage, you hear about space-based relays. What does that really mean? So if you think about it from the perspective of the Earth, the planet is covered in over 70% water, 29% ocean. And so what that really means for you is you can't put ground stations everywhere. That's how we did Apollo. Those missions relied on flying over specific land masses where you could communicate. And if you read the transcripts from the Apollo missions, it was all about, wait, I've just got an acquisition of signal over this land. Okay, I can talk to the crew members. And then once we went over the horizon and we had nothing, everyone just stayed quiet and then had to go and find a way of managing their time over an orbit. Well, space-based relay solved that problem. You could speak whenever you wanted to. And so one of the things that we did back at NASA, back in the 70s, was come up with this concept. So we designed and built it in the late 70s, launched it in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Badri did a great job presenting that. And you can see, as we go forward, the evolution has changed. We've evolved what these TDRS do. And so what we're really doing here is essentially showing a culmination of a concept that started 34 years ago when we launched the first TDRS spacecraft. And we're now doing it again for the third spacecraft of the third generation, the final TDRS we will ever launch. And what that does is extend everything that we have going forward. So from a human spaceflight perspective, I can tell you there are a lot of excited people here at NASA, not only just here at Kennedy Space Center, but all over the country. I can tell you there are flight controllers now watching this broadcast and will be watching intently tomorrow down in Houston as well. So let's go and talk about what this really does. And I do have a couple of videos here to show you. So let's talk about space-based relay and how this really works for space station, because that may just be an enigma for most people. So data is coming off the ISS. This happens continuously. It goes and points to a TDRS, which is scheduled, and it touches those big S-band antennas that Dave was referring to. And they're pushed down through those antennas down here to Las Cruces, New Mexico. They call it the White Sands Complex. And the reason for that is because the sands are actually white. I haven't actually seen it, so I haven't been able to verify it. So White Sands Complex it is. Again, located in New Mexico. And that's where all the 3 TDRS in each of the regions communicate with. Once the data arrives down in New Mexico, it gets transported via our own backbone back to Mission Control in Houston. It goes to all the different control centers for each of these different missions. Now, let's not just talk about how great ISS is in terms of what it does now, voice, data. We saw earlier this year they were able to go and demonstrate something that we are still trying to adapt here on the ground, and that's 4K ultra-high-def television. Well, we were able to go and demonstrate that earlier this year. And so there are plans on doing that. You can see continuously, if you go to NASA TV on your phones, you can see a high-def Earth viewing plan, which goes and shows you exactly what we have going on orbit, and you can see this beautiful picture of the Earth. So you can see that we're evolving. And so Badri alluded to 600 megabits per second. Well, what does that really mean? You can fit 4K UHD, and we did that, I believe, within the confines of what we have now. If we go up and double that to 1.2 gigabits per second, just imagine what we could do. And that's just in low Earth orbit. So let's go and talk about what that really means for us going forward. TDRS is not only just used for space station, it's used for launches. We're going to have TDRS launching tomorrow with TDRS looking over them. So one of the things that we're also going to be able to see, and I know that Dave mentioned this in the press briefing this morning, we're going to have the sister TDRS watching over TDRS-M as it launches. We are going to have the exact same things happening with our commercial crew partners when we launch both the Boeing Starliner spacecraft and the Crew Dragon mission, Dragon 2. And so if you think about the significance behind that, it will be the first time since the space shuttle where we have been able to go and speak to the crew members during ascent using TDRS. And so if you think about what that really means from a TDRS standpoint and being able to enable that type of technology based on where we were previously, it's something that we're looking forward to. I know I do have one video left, and that is going to show us where we're going in the future, and that's the exploration missions. So here you go. You can see Orion, and you can see the upper stage. And so what I wanted to show you was this specific burn. And I'll tell you why this is important. You can see the TV jump a bit there. That was deliberate. But what you can see here is essentially that one burn. What does that mean? TDRS has, these new generations have this extended field of view. These look between LEO and they can go all the way up to a geostationary orbit. That's what they can support. For Orion, when we take humans back into deep space, that burn is the burn, the translunar injection burn, which they did during Apollo. That is a burn that takes you from low Earth orbit into another orbit into deep space, lunar in this case. The space network, and it may be TDRS-M that does this, in addition to maybe the other TDRS, that go and verify that that burn is prepared for, it's executed, and that you can talk to the crew members like we did during the Apollo missions, all the way through, marking another milestone for the space network. This will be the first time that the space network will play a major vital role in the history of deep space communications and for our crew members. It is the lifeline behind every one of our crew members, and it is integrated with how we speak with the ISS, even today. Without communications, you just have a space station. So, again, just wanted to say thank you very much, and yeah.
We have some time for questions. I think we have some from social media. Ashley? Wait, let's get the microphone so people on the TV can hear you.
So Neil, a Twitter user named Coroloro asks, how much is involved in planning launch and orbit attainment for a single satellite like TDRS?
How much time is...
How much is involved in planning launch and orbit attainment for a single satellite like TDRS?
Well, I think that may be a good question for David, so let me go and give that one to him.
So I think that one is maybe it's a question might want a little bit more information on it. But what I would say is we started TDRS-M. This TDRS-M spacecraft build started at the end of 2011, and we're ready here to launch in 2015. So it took 4 years for the development of the whole spacecraft, as well as the capability to kind of the mission team and the launch team. There's a separate timeline I can hand over to Mr. Messer next to me from ULA. I think the launch vehicle piece of that is kind of an independent piece. We become integrated once we mate. I talked about we were just planning to mate when we had our incident, and once we recovered from that, well, then we mate, and we become an integrated vehicle, which is out there on the pad, ready to go tomorrow morning. So it takes a couple of years. Scott can talk a little bit more on the time needed for that. Our spacecraft took about 4 years to develop.
Cool. Do we have any questions in the room? Right here.
So I had a kind of question. It feels almost like Independence Day here because we're talking about satellites in line of sight.
Yes.
How are we able to test long distances here on Earth and whatnot? I mean, of course, we're doing deep space. How are we able to do that line of sight here on Earth?
Well, so actually, that's a very good question. So the way we do it now, it's not necessarily doing a test. It's all based on physics and link calculations. So there is a way you can actually go and characterize and build what we call a link budget that goes and tells you exactly how much data you can actually have over a specific distance. You can characterize it by doing it over a small distance with existing satellites that we have now. And then all you have to do is just increase the distance, change the gain parameters based on antenna sizes, data rates, and then determine if you can close a link. But there are ways we do that now. Yep. And we have a lot of tools that we use for that.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have time for right now. But remember, we're going to come back to questions. And if you're online, you can ask your questions by using the hashtag AskNASA. Thanks, Neil.
Okay. Thanks, Emily.
So the next speakers we have for you, two very special guests. These are two people who benefit directly from TDRS. They are astronauts Nicole Mann and Steve Bowen, and they're going to talk to you a little bit today about just how the network benefits them and how they use that as that lifeline home. How are you guys doing today?
Great. How are you? Thank you.
Doing good.
Thanks for having us.
So feel free.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'm very excited to be here. I'll be at the launch of TDRS-M tomorrow morning, which is extremely personally exciting for me because I've never seen anything launch before. So as an astronaut, this will be my first launch. So that's pretty cool. And as you've been learning today, TDRS is our lifeline to Earth when we're in space. And it's everything from communication, data, video. The whole team in mission control is continuously monitoring the ISS or whatever space mission that we would be on, and they're making sure that everything is functioning properly. They're sending a lot of commands from the ground to make sure that we stay safe. Additionally, when we're on a space station and we're doing science, a lot of times we'll be tied in directly to the principal investigator that can be looking over my shoulder real time on a camera while I am conducting an experiment. And they can talk me through something, or if I had a question, real time, we can interact. And so that allows us to be much more efficient and allows us to execute their science and our mission a lot better. And then, last but not least, it's also our interface with humans on Earth. When you're in space is extremely important. So not only can you talk to your colleagues, but also your family at home. So we certainly rely on TDRS, and we're really excited to see the launch tomorrow.
That summed it up really well, I thought. So I really don't have anything to add. I mean, it works really well, I can tell you that, and it's an incredible asset when you think of what communication we had before that. Even early on in the station days when the antennas weren't all there, I remember being the ground IV for one of the early U.S. EVAs on station, and there were real long periods of just no video. You get some comm. But as that little bit of video, that little bit of extra information, it really brings the whole team together, makes things infinitely more efficient. And we're almost spoiled now with how much communication we have. And it's really makes the science output and the ability to operate space station just as miraculous as it is. It's really an amazing feat.
Great. So we have some time to take some questions from the room and also online. We have questions here. Right over here.
I mentioned earlier I'm a ham radio operator. I'm curious, about half of the astronauts that go up, as I understand, get licensed, and the main purpose being so they can talk to students and promote STEM. So I'm curious, are either of you licensed ham radio operators, or do you have interest in maybe getting involved in that amateur radio on International Space Station organization and project?
Not yet, but yes. How's that sound? I can keep this clear.
So I've gone through some of the preliminary classes, and once you're assigned for a mission, then you're given the opportunity to get your radio operator's license and do some more in-depth training so that you can interface with folks on the ground, which I believe is very important. So I'm looking forward to that.
What other questions do we have? Come on, we have astronauts here. We're in shock. All right, right over here.
Hello. Thank you guys for joining us. In addition to the obviously scientific and more professional aspects that communication helps, how does the ability to communicate easier with family and friends back on Earth help when you're in orbit?
Well, my background, I came from the submarine force where you literally just disappeared for months on end at the time. And this ability to call home, it was really reassuring to have that ability to communicate, make sure everything's going well. You don't want to be running your world, you're running your household from space, but still being a part of the family, still being part of that community is really important, and it really keeps you connected with everything that's happening at home.
I think it's extremely important, especially as we move forward into these more long duration missions. So when we have some shorter duration missions, you could, maybe go through 10, 12 days, no problem. But if you're looking at 6 months, a year, or 3 to 4 years in the future, we have understood that those psychological effects of having that support is extremely important. And so you have to remember that you need to do your job, but you also have to take care of yourself. And so taking care of yourself and making sure that you are in your right mind allows you to be more efficient, allows you to do your job. So overall, makes you more effective. Yes.
Do we have any other questions? It's right over here.
I teach high school, and I asked my students before I left, I said, I don't think there's any other teachers at my school who are going to be at NASA, so if there's any questions you want me to ask, tell me now. Of course, we got the usual questions, but one question was, well, can't they just FaceTime? Can't the astronauts just FaceTime home? Is there a internet connection, and can you FaceTime or Skype, or how's that work?
Actually, they set that up, the support office. You can call home IP protocol telephone, so you can call home. There's a bit of a delay, which always confuses people the first time they get a call from space. So be patient. If somebody calls you from space, and the other part of that is you look at the number, and it's not any number right? So you're like, the heck? Do I just not even answer it because it might be another spam caller? So I've gotten to actually answering because occasionally, and then you got to listen. And then you can actually start a communication. As far as the video interface, they do set that up for families, for family services, depending on certain periodicity, weekly. It's been special events, things like that.
Right here.
Do you need to do any kind of special physical training in order to be an astronaut to go to the space station?
Special physical training.
So you do a lot of just physical fitness type training to prepare your body when you're functioning in a microgravity environment for such a long time. It's similar to if you got hurt on Earth and you were on bed rest. So you can imagine your muscles would atrophy because you're not using them to even walk or support your body weight. You'll also lose bone density because you don't have any impact, any loads on your bones. So we have some resistive exercise devices on board Space Station that use vacuum tubes. So you do quite a lot of lower body lifting for your hips and your legs to keep your muscles strong, but also to keep the bones from deteriorating as much. And then also cardiovascular, we have a treadmill, which is T2. You wear a backpack type harness, and has bungees so you can run. And then we also have a bike. The bike, of course, has no seat because you're in space when there's no gravity, so you don't need a seat. But it's got pedals, and you can hold on to something if you'd like to stabilize your body. So in preparation for that, we do a lot of physical fitness training but nothing other than that, really.
Right over here.
I know many of us are here today kind of sharing this experience with students back home. So I'm curious what message you would have for younger students about studying science and space.
Yeah, it's funny because I come from a fairly wealthy community up in New England, and I went back up there and visited, and I actually kind of asked the question how many people wanted to become scientists or engineers. I didn't ask the question who wanted to become an astronaut because it's surprising how few actually raised their hand, so I was looking for a larger number. And it surprised me how few raised their hand. And I've always said that, you know, science, engineering, medicine, if you want to change the world, that's how you change the world. Everybody else is working on the advances created in those fields. So if you want to really change the world with your life, that's where you need to go. And it's not glamorous. It's hard. You actually have to think. But that's so much fun. It really is. So that would be my short message. Yes, sir.
I have to. I would agree with Steve clearly. So when I was, young, I just naturally kind of became excited about math and science. But as I'm sure a lot of people have found out, when you're young, you don't really know exactly what you want to do. So you just kind of gravitate towards sometimes what's easier. And so I think it's important for kids to challenge themselves. And sometimes maybe that math and science isn't the easiest topic for you. But if you stick with it and stay involved, then you can understand. And maybe you'll find, in high school, maybe later on in college, that it comes a little more naturally to you. And I think it's very important because, as Steve mentioned, those are the fundamental building blocks of everything that we do. I mean, we wouldn't be flying in space. We wouldn't be having a live broadcast if it wasn't for the science and technology.
Do we have any other questions? All right, one right here.
So what's the longest that you've both respectively spent in space?
So I spent 0 days in space. I've been with NASA for 4 years, and I'm waiting my first flight assignment right now.
My first mission on STS-126 was about 16 days. That's the longest. Got 42 days total. So I'm just a pauper compared to the ISS guys.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions? Right over here.
What are you both excited about for the future of space exploration? Is it just the unknown of it, or just what technology is going to allow it?
Well, maybe a combination of the both. Obviously we want to go answer some of those fundamental questions that we all have about Earth and about space. Additionally, what I've really come to appreciate being a part of NASA is the incredible team of people at the agency that we work with. And I feel very fortunate to be part of that group. The energy is just amazing. From the people that have been at NASA for 30 years all the way to the young co-op that just started, they're all interested and they're all focused on one mission, and that's exploration. And they really have their heart into it to do the best job they can and to make sure that we are safe. And so I appreciate that. And for me, it's just really, it's being a part of something bigger than yourself or your team or your state or your country. It's really a world effort. And so that's the most exciting thing for me.
Oh, now he's looking at me. So you got the easy answers. Actually, I got a chance to watch the space station being built. And one of the most amazing things about the space station was we brought these modules together. Some of them never met on Earth. We got them to space and they fit together. And that's an amazing engineering accomplishment. We have research going on board space station. We had to develop new environmental control systems, new water processing systems. The engineering development that you get from exploration, where at the beginning of the program, we thought we were going to fly shuttle forever. So that meant we always had water on board space station. Suddenly, we're not going to be flying shuttle anymore. Where do we get water? Well, you have to recycle it. So we developed a way to quickly and cleanly recycle water very efficiently. And that pays dividends back down here on Earth. So you don't even know what questions we have to ask to solve problems we haven't had yet. And that's the real exciting thing about exploration. I don't even know what questions to ask because I don't know what problems I'm going to have because I haven't challenged myself to do that exploration. And as we solve those problems, that makes life so much better here on Earth. I think that's really what I find exciting about it.
Do we have any other questions? All right, right over here.
Do you two want to go to Mars?
Absolutely.
Sure. That was an easy question.
This is actually a question from someone online. They asked how old, sort of follow up on the Mars, how old do you think the first human that will land on Mars is currently?
So 53 plus. About 60.
That's a lot of high-level math.
Oh, right now. How old are you? 39? 30?
40. Thank you very
40.
much.
So I think 40 is about right. Maybe a little older. No, seriously, I think that's about right. I think that's actually, I think it's within our grasp in a sense, right? You know, we're talking about it not as science fiction, but as a reality, a real possibility. And it's not technology that's holding us back, I don't think. You know, I think we actually have the capability. It's the commitment we have to make to do it, if that's important to us.
Thank you.
So 53 plus.
All right, we can have one more question. Oh, wait, let's wait for the mic to get to you so people on TV can get.
She's an educator. She'll be able to hear her anyway.
Yeah.
As an educator, what can we do to encourage students to want to be an astronaut?
Well, I think the most important thing is to encourage them, like we talked about, to be involved in math and science and to stay in school and to continue to study. So I think things that you're doing right now, being here, being engaged, being involved, giving them real world examples of why them doing their hard work and long studying, why would it really pay off? Bringing that reality to them in the classroom, I think, is really the most important thing you could do.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So we've learned a lot today. We've learned about we've learned how we build these satellites. We've learned about how they'll support our astronauts. We learned about where the network's going. So really the only thing left to do is launch TDRS-M, right? And who better to do that than our friends at NASA's Launch Services and the United Launch Alliance. Joining me here today are Skip Owens from NASA's Launch Services. He is the Senior Integration Engineer, and Scott Messer from United Launch Alliance, who is the ULA's Program Manager for NASA missions. I made this mistake earlier of asking Dave if we're ready for launch, but is it okay if I ask you guys?
It is, and yes, we are.
Great. So what do you have to tell the folks today about launch and how we're getting there?
Well, I think I'll start off by kind of following on to the question that was asked by the Twitter user. It sounds like the spacecraft has kind of been working towards launch for about 4 years. LSP actually procured or purchased the launch service for TDRS-M almost 2 years ago, so it was October of 2015. And there's a lot of work, a lot of analysis, a lot of preparation that goes on during those 2 years to get us to where we've come to within the last few weeks, which is the really exciting part, the part where the hardware from the spacecraft and the launch vehicle really come together.
Yeah, and I would just add, so we've been 21 months in integrating the TDRS spacecraft onto the Atlas vehicle. And interestingly enough, this is actually, from my recollection, the fastest integration that we've ever done with our NASA counterparts at LSP. So this is a kind of a record-breaking activity for us today. So it's really exciting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the activities that we've had recently here at the Cape is basically getting the rocket ready and getting the spacecraft ready. And you've heard a little bit from the TDRS project manager about some of the operations the spacecraft did to get ready. I think we've got some video in a little bit that actually shows you some of the preparations that the launch vehicle does by itself, basically stacking the vehicle on the pad and getting ready on the launch pad for the spacecraft to arrive. And all of that goes on at the same time that the spacecraft is also doing its standalone operations in the payload processing facility. You heard a little bit about those preparations earlier. Where it all comes together and where LSP is really involved is when our launch vehicle contractor, which is ULA and Scott's team, really starts interacting with the spacecraft. And we call that integrated operations. And that's the point where you've got both teams working together to basically get the hardware prepped for launch. And so some of the video you're seeing here is some of the standalone launch vehicle operations, getting the launch vehicle hardware ready. You'll also see some of the standalone spacecraft operations that take place in the payload processing facility, and then further into the video, you'll actually start seeing. So this is actually the spacecraft arrival for TDRS-M. You'll also start seeing some of the integrated operations, and those are you'll see people in the bunny suits in the clean rooms, keeping the spacecraft clean. This is a standalone spacecraft processing operation that's going on here. You can see the technicians are working with the spacecraft. This is actually encapsulation, so this is one of the biggest integrated operations where literally the launch vehicle hardware comes together around the spacecraft, and that's about as integrated as you can get. And here's where we're actually transporting the integrated assembly, which is the fairing, the payload adapter, and the spacecraft, all bolted together out to the launch pad, lifting it up onto the top of the rocket, and then integrating it and getting it ready for launch.
Okay. Thank you, guys. So let me just keep going just a tad more. So on behalf of United Launch Alliance, we are super excited to be here as part of this, and very appreciative of the NASA community for trusting us to launch this critical payload. This will be the 72nd launch of the Atlas vehicle, and the configuration that is launching the TDRS vehicle is a 401. And of those 72 Atlas missions, 37 of those have been on the 401. So this is our most frequently used configuration. Almost half of the spacecraft that we've launched on our Atlas vehicle have been launched on this 401. The reliability of the 401 and the Atlas vehicle in general is surpassed by none. So here's a little view of the Atlas vehicle. Some of you in the room might be inclined to call this an exploded view. I will tell you, we don't like that terminology. We prefer expanded view. But it shows the different parts of the vehicle. So up at the top there, you can see the TDRS spacecraft. It's encapsulated by a 4-meter fairing. The fairing keeps the spacecraft safe and protects it from the environment as we launch. Going down the vehicle is our Centaur second stage, which is powered by an RL-10C engine. And then finally, down at the bottom is our booster, which is powered by an RD-180. Just a couple of fun facts from me. From my perspective, the RD-180, or the first stage, will burn. Takes about 4 minutes for it to burn. And in that 4 minutes, it'll go from about 860,000 pounds down to about 43,000 pounds. About 95% of the weight burns. In that 4 minutes, it'll burn about 75,000 gallons of fuel. So I did a little calculation for I drive a Ford F-150. That's about 3,000 tanks, or about 60 years worth of fuel for me that's going to be burned in 4 minutes there. So we do have a little video that shows the profile of the rocket and what's going to happen tomorrow. So let's go ahead and roll that if we can.
The following profile details the important events of this mission using approximate times.
2, we have ignition and we have liftoff of
The Atlas V RD-180 main engine ignites to lift the vehicle away from the pad. Shortly after liftoff, Atlas begins its initial pitch, yaw, and roll maneuvers to attain the proper ascent profile and minimize aerodynamic loads. The Atlas V reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound, at 80 seconds. At 92 seconds, the vehicle experiences maximum dynamic pressure. Approaching booster engine cutoff, the Atlas V is burning propellant at a rate of 1,600 pounds per second, traveling at over 11,000 miles per hour, and located 61 miles in altitude and 148 miles downrange. Booster engine cutoff occurs 4 minutes, 2 seconds after liftoff. The booster stage is jettisoned 6 seconds later. 10 seconds after booster separation, the first Centaur main engine start takes place. The payload fairing is jettisoned 8 seconds later. The vehicle now weighs just 8% of what it did at liftoff 4.5 minutes earlier. cutoff of the Centaur main engine occurs nearly 18 minutes after launch. The mission now enters a 1.5-hour coast phase. At just over 1 hour 48 minutes, the Centaur main engine is restarted. This burn will last less than a minute. Following the second Centaur main engine cutoff, at 1 hour 49 seconds, the mission enters a nearly 4-minute coast phase in preparation for spacecraft separation. At approximately 1 hour 53 minutes, Centaur releases NASA's TDRS-M satellite.
Yeah, so just 2 closing comments for me, and then we'll take questions. So I think it's interesting that so in 4 minutes we'll go from 0 to approximately 11,000 miles per hour. Just as a comparison, if you were on an airplane going 11,000 miles per hour, that'd take you from the East Coast to the West Coast in about 15 minutes. So that's a pretty good clip. And so now I forgot what the second thing was that I was going to say. Oh, what I was going to say is this. Yes, it will be exciting at 8:03 tomorrow morning, or that's assuming we get off at the front of the window. But for us at United Launch Alliance, the real excitement comes when that spacecraft separates approximately 1 hour and 53 minutes later. So go Atlas and go TDRS.
Thank you both. Do we have any questions in the room?
How have advancements in technology like 3D printing helped you all in projects like TDRS?
So that's a great question from a launch vehicle perspective. The spacecraft may have some other things. We are beginning to use 3D printing more and more. I'm not sure that we have any flight hardware that flies yet today, but we are certainly evaluating it. We have an additive manufacturing program. It reduces cost, reduces part count, and there are a lot of really positive activities that we are looking forward to from a 3D printing or additive manufacturing. I don't know, Skip, anything you want to add there?
Nothing in particular. I know we've started using some 3D printing techniques in LSPE to kind of help us, prototype various components or things that we're working on. And I know across Kennedy Space Center it's used quite a bit, so it's a great tool.
Just a reminder that you can join the conversation online by using the hashtag AskNASA. I think we're going to go to a question on social media.
So the same Twitter user as earlier, Coraloro, has a question. How many man-hours go into planning, timing, and fuel burn for a satellite?
For a satellite or for the launch?
The question says for a satellite.
Okay, so Dave, I don't know if you want to join us. I can tell you we spend about 50,000 hours in integrating a payload across, all the various activities that we do. We're driving that down significantly. We're probably down about 2/3 actually on that. Dave, any idea from you?
I mean, I think it would vary from burn to burn and in what phase of the mission that you're in. I think if it's with respect to once we achieve separation, when we plan our 4 burns, the propulsion system has been gauged and designed to handle, and it's been pre-planned as part of the NRE, the non-recurring engineering that goes into the satellite build as to how the propulsion system will be utilized. So there's a lot of non-recurring engineering that goes into the development phase down the subject matter expertise in the propulsion area. In terms of actually, operations, planning for a burn, that can take an order of, that also varies. But for TDRS, we execute our first burn in 3 days into the mission, but it's planned for by our propulsion folks, both on the Boeing side as well as on the NASA side. Probably 10 or more folks that are working, probably for at least a week, 2 weeks. And that's just to basically execute the first burn. There's all the pre-design work that's gone in to manufacturing and lining up the propulsion system, and then fueling it appropriately and then all the testing that goes on to make sure that it will meet the design requirements. So I think it's a couple, it's a couple of weeks, but that's just for the operational burns, and then the amount of time and energy that goes into the design to kind of make that happen is much, much more.
Yeah, and I suspect you guys spend quite a few hours as well, right?
Yeah, well, actually, in my previous life, I was at Goddard doing just that. I was designing the early mission design for spacecraft missions, much like TDRS, and that would occur, years in advance. And granted, that was just maybe one or two people. And as you got closer to launch and you had an operational team, like Dave was saying, you start bringing in other system experts to start planning the operation and execution of those maneuvers. So it grows over time. It starts small, and then of course as you actually get up to executing the maneuver, you have to bring in more people.
Great, and I think we have another question from social media.
This is probably another question for Dave. Is there a public copy of the requirements that must be met before handing off the satellite to the Space Network?
So we have a specification. I think we'd have to kind of go look at what it may be sensitive but unclassified SBU type of term that NASA uses. But in terms of, we have level 1 requirements, and then we have a technical specification for our spacecraft, which is something that we have to verify. And then there's a lot of other attachments that we have in our contract with Boeing that need to be met. So it's quite an assortment of documentation that is put together and made as part of basically what we call a request for proposal that then the contractors come in and bid on. It's similar in the launch vehicle area that there's the LSP organization will put out a request for bid against to meet emissions requirements for launch. It's the same thing for a spacecraft. We have level 1 requirements, which are specified from headquarters, but then there's a second level of activity where we develop the detailed requirements at Goddard Space Flight Center within the project that then we put on the project, puts on the contractor the way we've developed it, because it's an out-of-house emission versus an in-house developed emission. It's put out for bid, and then Boeing builds it to our specs.
Great. Do we have any questions in the room? One over here.
I'm also another teacher, and I'm here in communication, but I'm starting to think about all the integration that has to be done with all the different groups and people and pieces. Can you speak to the importance of the art of communication, the actual process that goes on to communicating with the different groups?
It's an excellent question. That's actually the hardest part of my job. It's not so much the technical. It's getting people from different groups and different perspectives. Somebody who's analytical and is really good at modeling something may not always have the best communication skills when it comes to talking to somebody who's physically hands-on with hardware all day. But as you can see in some of the videos we showed, those things come together. And if something goes wrong, a lot of times in order to solve those problems, those people have to communicate. And so part of my job as the integration engineer with LSP is kind of helping to fill those gaps and to communicate from various aspects across those disciplines and make sure that when they are communicating that they're communicating the right things and they're not missing some key aspect or some key component of the problem that we're talking about. So yeah, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. The art is really, really difficult. You can teach the science and you can put the science in a checklist, but teaching somebody the art of how to communicate effectively, it just takes experience and time.
Yeah, and I've heard this conversation throughout our meeting today. I just wanted to share, not to lose hope. Just forgive me for a little personal story. I took my son to work with me one time, and at the end of the day, his mom asked him, "So what did you think?" And his response was, "That is the most boring job in the entire world. I would never want to be an engineer." Guess what he is today? He graduated mechanical engineering, and so they'll come around eventually.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions? All right.
I don't have a question, but I want to follow up on that, on the last one here on the communication. We talk about launch. So we all get in a room tomorrow morning, and there are a number of us on headsets. I don't know what the number is, But what we do for the last 8 hours and then the last 4 hours when they do cryo load, it's all about communication. The spacecraft needs to make sure that its health and safety is ready for launch. The launch vehicle community has to make sure that its rocket is ready for launch. All systems are powered up, all of their propulsion, everything that they need, all their electronics is ready for launch. There's the range guys out there. You know, they have a flight termination system. They've got their orbital assets that will be tracking it. That's why we launch on the range. And so when we're confirmed to the launch date, the range that we launch out of has to make sure that its assets are there. So there's communication to make sure that the range assets are ready to go. There's communication with the network assets. We talked about TDRS is going to be tracking this TDRS going up and tracking the telemetry off of the launch vehicle. All of these assets are necessary in order for us to be go for launch. And so through the count, there are assets that we status on a continuing basis, and we watch those, and we have mandatories that are mandatory to be in place for launch, and we check those all the way. And if anything comes up, a boat comes into the area, there's an issue. We have weather. Weather's another part of our communication. There are weather briefings throughout the count. We're all on headsets. There's all multiple channels up, and we're all kind of trying to monitor our area, but there are times in the count where everyone is polled to make sure we are ready to proceed as a group to the next phase until we get to the final, what we call terminal count. And then everyone is polled for terminal count, which says we all agree that what we're responsible for is ready. And then they'll go around to the next party and they'll make sure everybody that reports to them is ready. So it is the launch activity tomorrow is all about communication.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I think you had something really awesome that you wanted to share with the group.
Yeah, we had one quick demo we wanted to do. I know for everybody in the room, we already handed out some of these target cards. So what we're going to demo for you today is called Spacecraft 3D. So it's actually an app that's been out for a while. But what's kind of exciting about the latest update is that we actually incorporated launch animations into the application. So the way the application works, it uses augmented reality. So it basically interacts with the physical world. In this case, the physical world is this card. So if you use the app and you basically center the card with the app, it will bring up a launch vehicle that you can then interact with on the screen. And of course it doesn't want to play with me. There we go. So once the launch vehicle actually pops up, you can actually run it through a launch animation. So it'll show you the launch. Don't worry, it's not burning your hand. And it'll actually take you through the sequence, some of the sequences that you actually saw in the videos earlier. And if you hit the next arrow, it'll actually pop you through a couple of the different sequences that happen throughout the launch. That was the SRB jettison. This is actually an Atlas V 551, so it's a slightly different configuration than what we're launching TDRS on tomorrow morning. You can actually see the spacecraft separation event. And of course, the key thing with augmented reality is you can interact with the physical environment. So in this case, what you can actually do is move the iPad around and get a different perspective on the launch vehicle. See it from a different angle, see it from the top. So it's really a lot of fun to interact with and kind of investigate the launch vehicle and the mission. So you can check it out. And then for those of you who aren't in the room and didn't get a card, if you're online, you can actually print that out from the app and use that piece of paper as your target for the application. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Technology, so cool. Do we have any other questions in the room before we wrap it up? All right, yeah, right over here. In the second row.
This actually has to go along with what we were talking about with the augmented reality. That's been kind of in the news recently. The astronauts up on the International Space Station are using that. How has that allowed them to better do their jobs? And can you explain some of that and how they're using it in real-term, real-life situations?
So I actually don't work with the astronauts, but from a launch services perspective, we have started looking into how augmented reality might be able to help us. And one of the thoughts is once you encapsulate the spacecraft and you're inside the fairing, you're in a very tight, confined compartment. So you can't bring a whole team of people and bring them inside the fairing to work an issue. So augmented reality can help you in situations like that where you can put a headset on a system expert who's sitting in a room, a mile away from the launch pad, and then send a single technician into that confined area and say, hey, I'm hands-on with the piece of hardware that's causing the problem. And the technician can also have a headset on. And with augmented reality, you can see what's physically in front of you, but then augment that reality with, instructions or schematics that the system expert might be sending you in real time while you're in there trying to troubleshoot the problem. So we see that as maybe a potential for some of our integrated launch operations, and I suspect on the space station they could use it in a similar way.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you join us again tomorrow for launch. Coverage begins at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time with launch slated at 8:03 a.m. You can watch online at nasa.gov/live or on the agency's Facebook page. If people have questions or want to know more, what should they do?
Tweet at us, obviously. No, join the conversation on social media. You can always follow along with the main agency flagship account at NASA, or if you want to learn more about TDRS, you can tweet at us at NASA_TDRS or on our Facebook account at facebook.com/nasa.TDRS. And actually, if you have more questions, we'll be going live later this evening at 6 o'clock live from the launch pad. So we're really excited about that, so make sure you send in your questions for there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Go Atlas, go TDRS-M.